In some parts of Thüringen also they have a May King at Whitsuntide, but he is dressed up rather differently. A frame of wood is made in which a man can stand. It is completely covered with birch boughs and is surmounted by a crown of birch and flowers, in which a bell is fastened. This frame is placed in the wood and the May King gets into it. The rest go out and look for him, and when they have found him they lead him back into the village to the magistrate, the clergyman and others, who have to guess who is in the verdurous frame. If they guess wrong, the May King rings his bell by shaking his head, and a forfeit of beer or the like must be paid by the unsuccessful guesser. At Varstedt, the boys at Whitsuntide choose by lot a king and a high steward. The latter is completely concealed in a May bush, wears a wooden crown wreathen with flowers, and carries a wooden sword. The king, on the other hand, is only distinguished by a nosegay in his cap, and a reed with a red ribbon tied to it, in his hand. They beg for eggs from house to house, threatening that where none are given, none will be laid by the hens throughout the year. In this custom the high steward appears, for some reason, to have usurped the insignia of the king. At Hildesheim 5 or 6 young fellows go about on the afternoon of Whit Monday, cracking long whips in measured time and collecting eggs from the houses. The chief person of the band is the Leaf King, a lad swathed so completely in birchen twigs that nothing of him can be seen but his feet. A huge headdress of birchen twigs adds to his apparent stature. In his hand he carries a long crook, with which he tries to catch stray dogs and children. In some parts of Bohemia on Whit Monday, the young fellows disguise themselves in tall caps of birch bark adorned with flowers. One of them is dressed as a king and dragged on a sledge to the village green, and if on the way they pass a pool, the sledge is always overturned into it. Arrived at the green, they gather round the king. The crier jumps on a stone or climbs up on a tree and recites lampoons about each house and its inmates. Afterwards the disguises of bark are stripped off, and they go about the village in holiday attire, carrying a May tree and begging. Cakes, eggs, and corn are sometimes given them. At Grossvargula, near Langensalza, in the 18th century, a grass king used to be led about in procession at Whitsuntide. He was encased in a pyramid of poplar branches, the top of which was adorned with a royal crown of branches and flowers. He rode on horseback, with the leafy pyramid over him, so that its lower end touched the ground, and an opening was left in it only for his face. Surrounded by a cavalcade of young fellows, he rode in procession to the town hall, the parsonage, and so on, where they all got a drink of beer. Then, under the 7 lindens of the neighbouring Sommerberg, the grass king was stripped of his green casing, the crown was handed to the mayor, and the branches were stuck in the flax fields in order to make the flax grow tall. In this last trait the fertilizing influence ascribed to the representative of the tree spirit comes out clearly. In the neighbourhood of Pilsen, Bohemia, a conical hut of green branches without any door is erected at Whitsuntide in the midst of the village. To this hut rides a troop of village lads with the king at their head. He wears a sword at his side and a sugarloaf hat of rushes on his head. In his train are a judge, a crier, and a personage called a frog flayer or hangman. This last is a sort of ragged Merry Andrew, wearing a rusty old sword and bestriding a sorry hack. On reaching the hut, the crier dismounts and goes around it looking for a door. Finding none, he says, "Ah, this is perhaps an enchanted castle. The witches creep through the leaves and need no door." At last he draws his sword and hews his way into the hut, where there is a chair, on which he seats himself and proceeds to criticize in rhyme the girls, farmers, and farm servants of the neighbourhood. When this is over, the frog flayer steps forward and, after exhibiting a cage with frogs in it, sets up a gallows on which he hangs the frogs in a row. In the neighbourhood of Plas, the ceremony differs in some points. The king and his soldiers are completely clad in bark, adorned with flowers and ribbons. They all carry swords and ride horses, which are gay with green branches and flowers. While the village dames and girls are being criticized at the arbour, a frog is secretly pinched and poked by the crier till it quacks. Sentence of death is passed on the frog by the king. The hangman beheads it and flings the bleeding body among the spectators. Lastly, the king is driven from the hut and pursued by the soldiers. The pinching and beheading of the frog are doubtless, as Mannhardt observes, a rain charm. We have seen that some Indians of the Orinoco beat frogs for the express purpose of producing rain, and that killing a frog is a European rain charm. Often the spirit of vegetation in spring is represented by a queen instead of a king. In the neighbourhood of Libčović, Bohemia, on the first Sunday in Lent, girls dressed in white and wearing the first spring flowers, as violets and daisies, in their hair, lead about the village a girl who is called a queen and is crowned with flowers. During the procession, which is conducted with great solemnity, none of the girls may stand still, but must keep whirling round continually and singing. In every house the queen announces the arrival of spring and wishes the inmates good luck and blessings, for which she receives presents. In German Hungary, the girls choose the prettiest girl to be their Whitsuntide queen, fasten a towering wreath on her brow, and carry her singing through the streets. At every house they stop, sing old ballads, and receive presents. In the southeast of Ireland, on May Day, the prettiest girl used to be chosen queen of the district for 12 months. She was crowned with wild flowers, feasting, dancing, and rustic sports followed, and were closed by a grand procession in the evening. During her year of office, she presided over rural gatherings of young people at dances and merrymaking. If she married before the next May Day, her authority was at an end, but her successor was not elected till that day came around. The May Queen is common in France and familiar in England. Again, the spirit of vegetation is sometimes represented by a king and queen, a lord and lady, or a bridegroom and bride. Here again the parallelism holds between the anthropomorphic and the vegetable representation of the tree spirit. For we have seen above that trees are sometimes married to each other. At Halford in South Warwickshire, the children go from house to house on May Day, walking two and two in procession and headed by a king and queen. Two boys carry a maypole some 6 or 7 feet high, which is covered with flowers and greenery. Fastened to it near the top are 2 crossbars at right angles to each other. These are also decked with flowers, and from the ends of the bars hang hoops similarly adorned. At the houses the children sing May songs and receive money, which is used to provide tea for them at the schoolhouse in the afternoon. In a Bohemian village near Königgrätz, on Whit Monday, the children play the king's game, at which a king and queen march about under a canopy, the queen wearing a garland, and the youngest girl carrying 2 wreaths on a plate behind them. They are attended by boys and girls called groomsmen and bridesmaids, and they go from house to house collecting gifts. A regular feature in the popular celebration of Whitsuntide in Silesia used to be, and to some extent still is, the contest for the kingship. The contest took various forms, but the mark or goal was generally the May tree or maypole. Sometimes the youth who succeeded in climbing the smooth pole and bringing down the prize was proclaimed the Whitsuntide king, and his sweetheart the Whitsuntide bride. Afterwards the king, carrying the maybush, repaired with the rest of the company to the alehouse, where a dance and feast ended the merrymaking. Often the young farmers and labourers raced on horseback to the maypole, which was adorned with flowers, ribbons, and a crown. He who first reached the pole was the Whitsuntide king, and the rest had to obey his orders for that day. The worst rider became the clown. At the May tree all dismounted and hoisted the king on their shoulders. He nimbly swarmed up the pole and brought down the maybush and the crown, which had been fastened to the top. Meanwhile the clown hurried to the alehouse and proceeded to bolt 30 rolls of bread and to swig 4-quart bottles of brandy with the utmost possible dispatch. He was followed by the king, who bore the maybush and crown at the head of the company. If on their arrival the clown had already disposed of the rolls and the brandy, and greeted the king with a speech and a glass of beer, his score was paid by the king, otherwise he had to settle it himself. After church time the stately procession wound through the village. At the head of it rode the king, decked with flowers and carrying the maybush. Next came the clown with his clothes turned inside out, a great flaxen beard on his chain, and the Whitsuntide crown on his head. 2 riders disguised as guards followed. The procession drew up before every farmyard. The 2 guards dismounted, shut the clown into the house, and claimed a contribution from the housewife to buy soap with which to wash the clown's beard. Custom allowed them to carry off any victuals which were not under lock and key. Last of all they came to the house in which the king's sweetheart lived. She was greeted as Whitsuntide queen and received suitable presents, to wit, a many-colored sash, a